Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Bryan McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories.
All right, so today we are going to talk about the criminal justice system. In particular, we're going to talk about jury duty, the lovely postcard that everybody receives in the mail and is called upon for their service. Some people get it every year, like me, and some people get it every couple of years or every 5 years. Good morning, D. How
Good.
you
I thought
doing?
this was interesting given your recent experience. And I don't think I've even been called for jury duty it's probably is at least 5 years or so.
I don't know why it is, but I get called for jury duty every single year. It must be. You know what it is? I actually have this theory. I know that they say it's random, but I wonder if it's because of my profession. Well, I guess I would make it would make the same claim for your profession as well, but I don't know why it is. But every single year I get a card.
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, I think part might be partially the county that you're in because you're in a different county than me. I'm in Santa Clara County. You're in San
Mm-hmm.
Mateo County. The other thing is, I think you always show up. So they're like, hey, this guy responds.
Yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
it too. As I do go, I mean, I don't mind help. I don't mind helping out if it's quick. So ours basically says something like, it's either going to be like 1 day or a maximum of like 2 weeks or
Mhm.
something like that on average. And so it doesn't bother me. I mean, you're cool enough to kind of handle things while I'm gone if something like that does come up. But I had a completely different experience this time. And I want to talk about it because when I explain this experience to you
Yeah.
for our listeners, you started generating these ideas on how we can perfect this experience. So I wanted to start off by describing exactly what happened, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the user experience of jury duty and ways in which we can perfect it. This should be a pretty fun episode because pretty much everybody at some point in their adult career gets called to jury duty. And yeah, here's the rundown. So basically, what happened is I got a postcard in the mail and it said, "Okay, here's your jury duty time. Here's your pass for parking. Just be here on this day." And I used to get like a piece of paper and it would say, if you need to, be recused, for whatever reason, fill this out or whatever. So I got this new postcard and I was like, oh, it basically just told me like, you better show up. And so I was like, okay, I'll go and I'll show up, go see how it goes. I haven't been to jury duties since the COVID outbreak. And I thought this would be kind of interesting to explore what was going on there. When I showed up, I parked my car, I went in through security, had to take off my belt, had to take off everything just to get into the building. And then I went down into this room, and there was probably about 100 of us down there. And the very first thing I noticed was we all stand in this big long line, and then they hand out pencils to everybody. And they were like, okay, write your phone number on the card that we gave you, and then drop the card inside of this big box. Give us our pencil back, and then that will count as you showing up for jury duty. So we go into this big, huge room. Everyone looks a little tired and frustrated to get there early in the morning, and people have work, and that kind of stuff. So it's understandable. And the room had been changed a little bit since the last time I was there. They used to have these old televisions like mounted on every corner of the room, and they would play like a VHS tape of like what it's like to do jury duty. They changed that. They took those screens out, which is great. Put a big, massive flat screen in the center of the room. Let everybody know that they need to watch this video. Looked very new, very updated. It was really good video, actually, kind of explained the whole process of jury duty. And then what they said is, why don't you just sit here and wait for about 45 minutes? So everyone's kind of just sitting there waiting around for the judge to decide whether or not they need people for this particular trial that's coming up. And that would be upstairs in a different room. So we sat downstairs, waited. After about 45 minutes, they made a call. And what they did is, of the 100 people, they just started going down the list and calling off names. And my name got called off first. And so I got up. They said, please go up to courtroom 2 and wait there. And then the judge will let you know what's going on. So we go up there, we wait another 15, 20 minutes outside of the courtroom itself. Finally, they open the doors. The bailiff brings everybody in. We go into the room. The very first thing I noticed was there's a bunch of desks set up near where the judge sits, and just massive piles of paper everywhere, like just boxes and paper, and just everywhere. It didn't look very organized, so to speak. I was a little surprised, to be honest with you. I thought the courtroom would be completely empty, and then there would just be like the court reporter and the bailiff in there, and then they would just have this conversation with us. But there's like boxes and paper everywhere. I don't know what's going on. So that kind of caught my attention. And then we sat down, and the bailiff said, "Okay, everyone, please rise. The judge is here." The judge walks in and says, "Hey, this is a very unique situation. Um, we have a trial that is going to take probably 2 months to finish. And this particular trial is going to be 3 days a week. So like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or something like that. And you'll need to report for those 3 days for the next 2 months." And everybody looked at each other like, "Wait, what? Like 2 months?" Like lady next to me was like, "I have daycare. I have like, there's a lot going on." So it's a very disruptive process, especially when it's that long. Now, it's normally not that
Yeah.
long. Usually these trials go for a week or two, but it was a civil trial. It wasn't a criminal trial. So then the judge proceeded to say, "Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about this particular trial. I'm not going to share any of those details because I was told I wasn't supposed to. But the one thing that they did mention is that this event that occurred happened 9
Yeah.
years ago." And I was like, "What? 9 years ago? Like, how does either side even remember what happened 9 years ago?" So that kind of shocked me, and I was really surprised. And I remember you talking with me about how um, the system is so backed up,
hmm
especially on the civil side. It could take a long time for your trial to come to fruition, and the reality is this one came to fruition 9 years after it happened,
Yeah, it's
right? And so I was a bit shocked by that.
I feel like there is. I mean, the criminal side of things takes forever too. I mean, there's was it Robert Durst or something was arrested in like years before his trial even came to pass. So I keep looking at the system, and your experience was very similar to the last experience that I had, where you spend so much time just waiting around, like all your time just waiting around, and it's one of those things where if this was a better designed process, if they just had different processes, maybe even some low tech solutions, you don't even need high tech solutions for something like this. If you just cut down on the waiting just a bit, so you weren't just like, all right, I spent, 8 hours waiting around to talk to the judge for 15 minutes, if that, right? I mean, I don't even know for most people if it is 15 minutes.
Yep.
Then you might have more people actually show up. So there are so many things you can do. Like you just waiting around in this room, you can't do anything. Uh, just like when I was the last time I went, it was summer. It was super hot. The air conditioning worked very poorly, and there was like 80 people in a room. You can't even do that anymore right now with the prevalence of COVID. Even though we're kind of on the what appears to be the downslope of the pandemic, it was both tremendously inconvenient, inefficient, irresponsible, and it makes sense why everybody wants to duck it. Now, because we are who we are, the first thing that comes to mind is how do we fix this?
Yeah, well, let me tell you a few more details that I think might add some color to
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing. So when everybody was looking at each other, and like I said, there was 100 people in the room, the bailiff started laughing. He's a really funny guy, and he said, "Who, if you need to be recused, you need to fill out this form." And so they hand you a pencil and they hand you this form, and you're supposed to write like within like 5 minutes or 10 minutes a 1-page reason of why you need to be recused from the
Yeah.
trial. And so 50% of the room or more raised their
Mm-hmm.
hand. And so I'm sitting there, with this piece of paper, on a little pad or whatever, trying to write like why I can't do this. I mean, from daycare to work to everything, right? Trying to outline this whole entire process. And people were all filling these things out. And the way in which they go about this, which is really interesting, is that they take all these pieces of paper, they pile them up. Say they had 50 of them, right? Then the judge goes in the back room with the prosecutor and the defense attorney, or however that all the lawyers basically, and they sit around and they read through all of them, and then they allow the first group of people to leave. So they come back and say, Demetrius, please stand up. You can go home
Mm-hmm.
now, and they just kind of let you go. Now you don't know why they were let go, right? Now I guess if you put in there something like, I'm the sole caretaker of my child or something like that, maybe they're like, okay, we can't do this. But they didn't let me go, and so I went through 4 rounds, and it was literally we had to take a 2-hour lunch break before I was able to come back and go through it. And then the judge said, "I'd like to talk to you further about what you wrote. Can you please come in the back room?" So I went in the back room and I explained my case. I had to explain my case to the judge and all the lawyers and everybody. And ultimately, at the very last minute, they were like, "Okay, fine, we'll let
Mm-hmm.
you go." But they didn't want to. And she asked me a very, very interesting question that I thought was really insightful onto how they actually think about this. She said, I've worked with people like yourself who work remotely and that kind of stuff. Isn't it possible that you could just get all your remote work done 2 days a week and then spend 3 days a week for the next 2 months here? And I said, no, I can't. My clients demand my time, and I have this other side of our business that we run. And I said, I work 5 days a week. I said, I can't work 2 days a week for the next 2 months. I said,
Yeah.
otherwise my business will go under. I said, it's just not how businesses run. And that moment made me
They have no
realize.
idea.
She said, well, remote workers can work whenever they want. They had no idea. They had no idea. So, anyways, they recused me. They let me go. Like I said, filled out more paperwork, dropped it into a bin, and then they pile up all the papers and hand them to someone else. And it was like a very manual
Mm-hmm.
process. But the reality is they didn't understand. They just assumed that the word remote work meant that I just work whenever I want, that there's no needs for any time of the day in which people would want to communicate or
Well,
connect with
yeah.
me, right? And I was like, that's so disconnected from reality. And that's what really got me kind of like excited in my head to do this podcast, because I was like, there's got to be a better way to do all
Well, there
this.
absolutely is. And one of the things that strikes me is they're like, well, just be here 3 days a week. And well, you took up 3 days. There's only 7 days in a week. So now yeah, I can't even if I work all weekend, I'm still missing a day. Where's that extra day come from?
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention just the unavailability for meetings
Exactly.
and things like that are pretty important. You can't just kind of step all that stuff away. And it speaks to me about how it seems as though maybe they're just not they don't understand the amount of pressure that and kind of workload that exists within the private sector.
Well, she said something I thought was really interesting. She came out and she made an announcement to
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And she said, just so you know, having a boss that is in deep need of you being present every day is not an excuse to get out of this service.
Yeah, it seems deeply uncaring about the situation, right? Like you could have significant economic reactions because of that. You can have a neighborhood business go out of business because staffing is very, very tight right now, and that's just the nature of our economy right now.
Yeah. And another thing that kind of caught my attention about that comment as well was they're lumping everything into a company group, like a large
Yeah.
company, right? So we have a small company. If you work for a large company by law, absolutely they have to let you go as long as the
Hmm.
trial goes. That's just the way it works. There's a little bit of a gray area to that though, because as you know, working in tech, if you just let 2 months slide by, I mean, the projects you're working on, the things that you're doing, personally that matter to you can really slip away as well. And I'm not saying don't give your service. Like there were tons of people in the room that rose their hand and were like, "I'm unemployed," or I'm retired. I'd be more than happy to help out and sit here for the next couple of
Yeah.
months." Right? It'd be interesting, and it did sound like an interesting
Yeah.
trial or court case. So it's just that there's nuances to it, and they put a lot of pressure on you, and it's really hard because it's like people have to take care of their families and stuff like that, and at the same time, they do want to give a little bit of um, service or time to your state and your country and that kind of stuff. But 2 months in this particular case was
Well,
really a
it's
long
also the
time.
majority of people throughout the country. The majority of jobs around the country are not coming from large corporations. They're coming from small businesses. And even if you are, and some of these small businesses, like
Yeah,
my partner's a chef, and if they don't have enough people show up, they can't open. So you can imagine there are some small businesses, some small stores or restaurants or service companies where if they miss out on one person it calls in sick and another person has jury duty, they can't open. And now what happens to that business for 2 months? They need to find someone or figure something out so they could go under. And
exactly.
that is something that the selection process won't take into account because it's not a direct impact on the person in the jury duty. It's an indirect impact on an external company. Beyond that, even if you are, let's say you're a tech worker.
I was gonna say that I think the reason why they do this though, D, is because it's like everybody would like to get out of it.
Sure.
Like everybody wants to continue doing the thing that they normally do and not sit in a courtroom every day. So I understand the reason of throwing the blanket over like
Mhm.
everybody and saying like you all have to show up. I understand it. It's just that sitting there and being part of it and experiencing the people on the left and the right of me made me realize it's not as simple as it's
Well, it's
made out to
such
be.
huge commitment. It can have such a terrible impact on your life. If you are a tech worker, right? What's going on in the tech industry right now? You're a remote tech worker, massive layoffs. So you're gone for 2 months. You just made yourself a target for the layoffs
Yep.
because that means they're probably not going to try to punish you because you decided to participate in jury selection process. It's because what will happen is you just won't have projects assigned to
Yeah.
you, so you become the easy person to lay off because they'll say, "Oh, well, Bryan doesn't have any active projects, so it'd be easy to get rid of him, to lay him off rather than reintegrate him." So that is a
Yeah.
massive negative,
Yeah. I agree with
and this
that.
is why people don't want to do jury duty. One of the reasons. The other issue is it's so unpleasant that nobody wants to do it, and that's kind of a lot of the conversations you and I had that led to us saying, like, "Why don't we do a podcast on this?"
Yeah, there were some other things that actually happened during this time, and then I want to get into like some of the ideas that you actually had about how to kind of update this process. Was I was standing out in the hall because you have to go out in the hall, and I was just waiting for them to call us back in because they were, I don't know, doing something. I forgot what the situation was, but I was standing in the hall, and it's kind of strange that like the both sides, the prosecutors and the defense, and their represented people, like they're like standing in the hall with us,
Mhm.
which is kind of, I don't know. It feels strange. I feel like they should be in a different room or something, but just because of bias or I don't know. But anyway, so that kind of caught my attention. That was an interesting part of the flow. And then I happened to overhear a lawyer talking to a young guy. He seemed really nice. He was 19 years old or something. I heard him say he was like 19, about how he got in trouble. I don't remember exactly what it was. He got pulled over for something, and he was there and had to talk to the judge. And the conversation was so casual around, well, we'll talk to the judge, see if we can get you the lightest sentence possible. What did you do? And he started describing it and stuff. He's like, okay, well, maybe I can just get you like this or that. And it was such a casual discussion about this person's life. And I thought to myself, wow, like this is so subjective. Like the lawyer's going to go in and just throw out a couple of ideas that might work, just to kind of like close up this case, and make it not too bad for that 19-year-old, but it's not like objective in any way. It just seemed very subjective just listening
Mhm.
to this. And I remember thinking, like, these are huge impacts on this person's life. Like, even if they do 6 months in jail or they do 3 months of something else, right? Like, it's still an impact, and he didn't really have a lot of time to like process it. It was kind of like, okay, does that sound pretty good? I'm going to go in there and work this out. And I was just like, wow, like that seems very, very casual for a long and impactful effect on someone's
Yeah, it
life.
kind of
But
sounds like an episode
yeah,
of
very educational for me to
yeah.
go.
Well, it kind of sounds like an episode of Better Call Saul. It's just like it's people just like
Yeah, well, it really was. I mean, I think it was because he got pulled over and he had I think he said they said something, he had something in his car he was shouldn't have or whatever it was, and he was there I think with his mom or something like that. It was just like, I don't know, it was just kind of sad because it seems so like it's like something you're
Mhm.
negotiating instead of sitting down and saying like very objectively like, hey, you got pulled over with this and so you have to do this thing and that's it. But it was just like, hey, if you have a really good lawyer who can negotiate really well for you, then you might get a really light sentence, you know. And I just I don't know, it was really interesting to watch, and I know that's how it's done, but I don't know. There's so many ways that this stuff can be improved, but you know, it's government and it moves slower,
Mhm.
right? And so maybe softening the edges is the best way to kind of like make this system and this whole process just a little bit better. What do you think?
Well, so I think a lot of the issues related to this whole system kind of turning out the way it is because of a lot of the inefficiencies that exist. And a lot of that is related to a lot of these are just legacy processes that haven't kind of been updated. So I think that the caseload system is backed up and slow because they're inefficient. You spend so much time waiting, and that that makes it more difficult to get juries in, and the juries don't want to do it because they're so inconvenienced. It takes way too long. At the time they're spending, a lot of it is just boring and uncomfortable. So those are all things that can be improved. Now, like just for an example, right before I get to the big idea, you mentioned how you came in and they said if you want to be recused, then raise your hand and now fill out a form. Well, that could have all been done at home, right? You could have, gotten your postcard, gone to a website or something, and filled it in and said, "Hey, I want to be recused. Here's my thing." And then when you get there, or even the first day, they can just call in the people who want to be recused and start asking them questions rather than wasting the time who don't care about being recused. Or they can just say, okay, well, even if we recuse all the people automatically, we don't make them come in, that we have enough people who don't want to be recused that we can start jury selection amongst them. So it can cut down a lot of just inconveniencing people and wasting their time, and then you can get right to a faster jury selection process, and you can get to the court case or the trial much quicker rather than spending all this time on jury selection and things. The other thing I noticed when I was there was like you spend so much time waiting, and then you are in these uncomfortable environments where you can't do anything. How about you make the environment a little bit more welcoming or more efficient or more productive? Give me like a little desk so I can bring in my laptop and I can work on stuff or something else while I'm waiting to get called in to the courtroom in order to have these conversations.
Yeah, so like one of the things that happened when we were down below, like, and they were trying to figure out who was gonna have to go up to the courtroom, was they did say like we have water over there, you know, you can turn around and try to sit. You know, they did have a few little desks there, but not enough for everyone who was in the room. But when we got up to the courtroom, it was basically like turn off your phones, turn off your
Mhm.
laptops. All you can do is basically sit quietly in the room, and in reality, you're kind of sitting quietly in the room for a good probably 4 hours if your name doesn't get called in the first couple
Yeah,
of rounds. So it did take a lot of energy
yeah.
out of you.
Well, the last time I did jury selection, I was sitting around and I was waiting for the first set of people to come in, and I had to come back the second day because uh, I was the last. I was they brought up everybody, had us sit in the jury in the chairs, and then you have to sit there and wait while other people talk about their life. About like, oh, they ask all these questions. Have you ever had this experience, that experience? What do you think about this? I'm thinking, I don't really need to hear all this about somebody else's life that is probably not going to end up on the jury, or if they are, like, do I need to know about their pre-existing biases as another jury member? That can all be skipped. You can do a lot of this stuff ahead of time or individually, and not have them in the room. Maybe even if they're outside of the room and going and doing something else, at least now they're not sitting around and waiting. Or before I got called up, I was just sitting in the courtroom, in the audience area, waiting for them to dismiss the first group so they can call me up from the second or third group. And there's a lot of inefficiency there that can be cleaned up.
I was thinking the same thing. Actually, a lot of the questions that they asked were very personal. And so it was great that the judge did pull a lot of individuals aside and take them into the back room and ask them those those particular personal questions, because I thought to myself, after they were asking me those questions, I don't know that I would want to answer all these in front of a
Yeah.
hundred people, you know?
Well, I think the other thing that I found, and I mentioned this idea to you, so this is the big idea. Why does a jury need to be there to hear all of the evidence and argumentation delivered live? It seems as though, because this is supposed to be based on the evidence and kind of rational thinking rather than kind of appeals to emotion, that or appeals to biases, that you could record most of the trial. Maybe for example, maybe the jury comes in and hears the opening and closing statements, maybe some very important key witness testimony. But otherwise, I'm betting that uh, for every 8 hour day in the courtroom, there's maybe 3 hours of actual evidence presentation and testimony. There's only 3 hours of things that are actually going to end up on the record. So why not record that? And at least for a lot of this stuff, right? And maybe some of the most critical stuff, you actually come into the courtroom and you deliberate in person. Uh, why not record that and have the jurors kind of uh, edit out things? You see this in movies all the time, like, oh, strike that from the record. Well, just instead of the jury being exposed to that and being instructed to ignore it, just edit it out of the recording. You can have them watch. Even you can bring them in and have them watch together, so that you know that they're watching it, and they can even have conversations about them if that's part of the process. Uh, but you can condense, maybe you can do 2-3 days into one day of consumption for the jury, and then they can deliberate together in a room, and then they can bring their verdict, and that can remove a lot of the biases of either they like the lawyer, dislike the lawyer, like the defendant, dislike the defendant, like the plaintiff, dislike the plaintiff. All those different biases that you might have can help reduce them, because you're not personally connecting them to them in the same way. And if that's the idea behind how the criminal justice system is supposed to work, then why aren't we doing stuff like this? And it, at the same time, can make everything so much more efficient, can make cases and trials go so much more quickly, and plus all the backlog that's involved with it, which means that you can start getting some of these cases that take, you said 8 years for it to get to trial, to actually kind of get these things done more quickly and not be a 2 month commitment. Could be a 2 month commitment, could be a few days over the course of 2 weeks, and that's it.
Absolutely. I mean, when you presented this idea, so many things ran through my mind. And I think the first thing that ran through my mind was that you would fundamentally change the way trial lawyers are educated, because there's a big part of what they do that has to do with persuasion and grabbing and kind of swinging emotions throughout the trial by probably looking you in the eye and being firm about a particular point or a fact. By cutting all that out and placing it into video segments, it's very pure. uh, it's not like you can ask questions anyways during the
Mm-hmm.
trial. So you basically can sit at home or in a room and just watch these videos in a comfortable space and write notes and not worry about anyone seeing your notes. I mean, there's just so many reasons why this would be really, really interesting. And actually, they could start off the entire trial by simply having you go in, meet the lawyers, let them do their opening remarks, and then say thank you so much for your time. The videos will be produced in the next, I don't know, month or two. We'll bring you back in and you can start watching these things and start making your decisions. It's really interesting, and it's a very modern way of thinking about presenting data and information, because that's the way that we do it with our
Yeah.
users, right? We don't present stuff to clients that hasn't been edited yet. We look at how it's structured and what they said. And if they said, oh, I don't really want to share that, that's very private information, we can cut that out. And the client sees what they are supposed to see from the participant who was kind enough to help us get through the research and get the data that we needed. So I love this idea. I think we should present this as one of our proposed kind of ideas. I just don't think that it would ever unfold because I don't think that the system is set up to take such a drastic shift or change in the process of uh, of running
Well, there's
trials.
so much inertia around the system. So a big change like that, the way that I would promote this is just like, well, let's speed up the jury selection trial so we don't have people waiting around all the time, and let's speed up the trial portion in small ways by starting to digitize certain aspects of things. So, like the easiest way is like we said before, is like if you're going to apply for a recusal, let's go ahead and get that in ahead of time so that you know who you're going to call up, you know who what they're going to say. You already have a response ready to go, and you can have that conversation rather than like processing it real time. And I don't know if judges maybe don't want to do kind of that kind of thing. That they just want to show up and have it in the moment. But at the same time, if you want to have people show up for jury duty and being willing to do it, and not every single person trying to get recused as vigorously as they can, then that's part of the process of making it easier for them. It's just simple usability. Make it easier and less painful, and it's going to be easier for them, which is going to make it easier for you as the judge or as an officer of the court.
Absolutely, and I think my final thoughts kind of on this, in regard to like process and how they can smooth out this whole thing is I think also integrating technology a little bit better. So right now, they mail you a card, and I do understand that not everybody has access to a computer, not everybody has access to all the technology that. But if you look at the statistics, something like 98% of people in the United States, 98% have a phone that can accept text messaging in their
Mhm.
pocket. So I think it'd be great to just send someone a text and say, hey, press one if you're confirming that you'll be here today. So you confirm that you're there. Then you show up. And then you say, okay, I got to go back to work. It could be 3 hours before you need
Mhm.
me, right? You leave. And if your number gets called, they send you a text and say, hey, you got to be here within 15 minutes. And then you just go, because you can go to a Starbucks and go work, or you could go do something else. And you don't have to sit in this room and just wait and wait and wait. They can just send you a text if you were chosen. And then if you're chosen, then you go up and then you go through the screening process and they say, oh, by the way, we have lunch and then it's going to take another hour or two to review documents before we communicate with you. Great. Send
Yeah,
me a text. I'll come back when it's time to do that. I feel like we could smooth that out just by basic text messaging technology that's been around for a very long time and the majority of the country has. Do you
yeah, I
agree?
think so. I think that you can just set up an environment, right? So part of this could be environmental design, and if you're working in a place like if you're a chef or if you're in retail or something or a firefighter or something where your work involves being in person, then this might not help you. But for all the people who can do any form of work remotely, then you can set up a co-working location next door or even in the facility so that it's like, all right, well, I'm waiting around for the next 3 hours. I'll just go over here. I can grab myself a bagel and a cup of coffee and at least get caught up on emails and Slack messages and stuff. And that will help get people in.
Yeah, I love the idea of like what you just said there of like a co-working space is like upgrading the whole like we have a cafe inside of the
Hmm.
building to we have like a WeWork,
Yeah.
It's like a place where you can actually sit down and feel like you're at work and then they just ping you and then you run down and then take care of business and then go back up or whatever it is. I mean, that would be so modern to do. Like simply upgrading the building itself would
Yeah.
change the whole process. Can I tell you a little side note here? So we have a Toyota Prius. And back in the day, like 2017, 18, before the pandemic, we used to kind of like fight whoever gets to go and take the Prius to have it serviced because they have a lounge where they have all the different types of coffee. They have donuts. They have cream puffs. They have like so much fun food that we don't normally eat on a regular
Hmm.
basis that I'd be like, oh, I'll just take it in. I'll take it in. I'll work from there. And you sit there and you work from there for the next hour or two because they had all these amenities. And it's like, who wants to go sit and have their car worked
Yeah.
on, right? Well, I did because they had all these fun foods and great coffee. So it's like you can drive people to your location just by simply providing a better overall
Yeah.
life
And to your
experience.
point about people who are, don't have access to a lot of the computer technology and things, they don't. maybe they don't have a smartphone or something, they can still engage in the legacy process, right? And it's still an option for them to do that.
One of the things that actually occurred when I was there was once we actually got up to the point where we were all talking to the judge, she had said, like, if anyone here doesn't speak English, or has a difficulty reading English, please stand up and explain yourself, right? And so these people would stand up and they would say, I speak just a little bit of English. I can't read it very well. Like, if there's advanced stuff that you're going to be talking about, it might be challenging for me. And then she kind of let them go. And I'm like, why didn't we filter them out like 3.5 hours ago so they can go back to their job? Like, why did it have to go all the way up to the point where the judge was
Yeah.
there? I think if you don't speak English very well and it's going to be challenging in a court case where they're going over like advanced documents or something like that, that's fine. That's fine. It just let them go. They can come in and help with another case where maybe you're not looking at like contract revisions and things like that, right? Where the language might be more challenging. No problem with that at all. But like those poor people had to sit there for like almost 4 hours just for the judge to say, oh, no, you can go.
You can
Feel free.
have another way of. I mean, there's so many other ways of doing that. I mean, what are you getting from having them come down in person in order for them to tell you that they don't speak English that you couldn't get from a video call, right? There's you're not getting any additional information by having them tell you in person that you would get over some kind of a video call of them. There's no way to verify. Okay, well, so and so doesn't speak English. If you're going to do that, then why not just do it over a video call? Not make them come down there,
Uh-huh.
take time off of work, pay for parking, pay for gas. Like I'll wait around for 4 hours in order for the judge to do that. You would never do
Uh-huh.
that within a corporation. You'd have somebody on a lower level do that so that you're not wasting the time of the high value executive or whoever else is making the decisions.
I mean, to be fair, like parking is free, but like, yeah, you're right. Like, you have to take the time, you have to adjust your schedule, you have to pay for gas and all that kind of stuff. And also, maybe these people, wanted to come, or maybe in some cases, people don't have access uh, to video technology or something like that. But you're right. I mean, it's basically what you're saying is you're saying there's a lot more filtering that can happen prior to even showing up at the
Yeah.
courthouse. No, I'm going to actually summarize the whole thing for you because I think I've kind of figured out your thinking around this. So one is we filter like crazy prior to getting to the
Mhm.
courthouse. Then we get to the courthouse and it's more modernized and it accommodates the fact that a lot of people need to work. So you find a place for them to work. And then we use technology, such as text messages and stuff, in order to corral everybody and bring them into the room when they need to come in the room. And then when they come in the room, and they have the opportunity to communicate with the judge. If it's going to take a couple hours, we let them go. We let them do what they need to do and they can come
Mhm.
back. And we just basically create a better flow so it isn't there's not so much friction with being present at this
Yeah.
location, and people don't go ugh the minute that they get their jury summons, right? Because the reality is that with user experience, if the first emotional reaction you have to someone asking you to do something is ugh, you got a long way to
Yeah.
go before you're going to get people delighted in order to come and join your experience.
Yeah. So
Correct?
what I would want to do, because we're all very busy and we all have a lot that we want to get done. I like to cut out as much waiting as humanly possible. Like just reduce the waiting. If there's especially the
Yeah.
idle waiting, like just let's try if there is a way to reduce it. Let's do it. And for context, when we do user research that involves interviews, we start off by number one filtering out anybody who would filter out on my right away, so we're not wasting the time by doing that, right? So it's if you don't speak English, okay. If you don't have the relevant experience, okay, then you're filtered out of the process. All the things that we can do in order to reduce it down to okay, here are the only people who are qualified and will be appropriate. Now, before we even get to the interview, there's a pre-interview, right? And that's to make sure that our understanding of their situation is correct and they really are qualified. And it's also to ensure that they're actually going to show up and pay attention. Because if they're not going to, if they don't
Yeah.
answer, if it's a 5 minute pre-interview, it's usually just over the phone. Just call them up. So we're going to call you sometime within this 10-minute block, and then we'll have this quick conversation. If they don't answer, if they don't respond, then you're like, oh, then okay, well, this person's not gonna engage in the full interview or a full jury trial. So let's move on from them and get somebody else.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you can cast a wider net and get more people involved in this process. and it won't take as long. It won't be so painful for anybody, not just the jurors, but for the judge, for the prosecutor, the defendant, the bailiffs, like the clerks, everybody involved. I mean, it'll make it easier for everyone involved, and then the whole court system can move a little bit faster.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, these are some really good ideas, and I like how you're thinking through how to make it better for the person who's getting called. It's not just how do we make it easier for the lawyers, how do we make it easier for the judge, but how do we make it for the people who are really providing the
Mhm.
service, right? The time and commitment, because you only get paid like, I don't know. I think when you're on a court, it's like $30 a day or something like that.
It's like,
It's like
but
some
even
ridiculously
I
small
don't know if
amount of
that's
money.
even legal. I don't know if that meets the federal like minimum wage requirements. uh,
Yeah, I forgot what it is, but it's some like really small number, if not
yeah,
anything, right? If it's really short. But then the people that are working it, right? The lawyers, the judges, they're all getting
yeah,
paid, right? That would be like if we didn't pay people to help us with the
mhm,
research, right? We're just like, oh, you just have to do it for free because we sent you a summons, right? Which is fine because you're doing your civic duty. I understand that, and I like that. I did, and if it was a week long, I thought it'd been a really interesting trial to be part of. But there's so much friction that it almost makes you biased. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was driving and we were going to do this podcast. I was like, you know, if you come in
yeah.
irritated and frustrated, does that make you a good juror? Someone who's relaxed and can see both sides and really wants to absorb the information? Or does it put you in this state of being frustrated and angry and you just want
Yeah.
it over with, right? That's not good either.
So it is like, imagine this scenario, right? Because I would like to do a civic duty, and there's plenty of people who do, right? Imagine that it was modeled maybe a little bit more like I'm thinking about like the Army Reserves, right? Where you have a week or two each year, and then have like a week in a month, right? So imagine that other than showing up for the very important stuff, maybe there's some key witness testimony, like if the person's going to testify on their own behalf, and the opening and closing arguments, where a lot of times they will kind of like set will summarize everything and kind of like provide the necessary context for the pieces of evidence to fit together. But for the standard days, like you show up on a Saturday and you sit in the room, maybe with other jurors or something, and you watch all of the relevant testimony and evidence selection from that week just on one day. So you give up a Saturday, right? And I would absolutely do that because, and there's plenty of other people who do because we know that they do because plenty of people sign up for Army Reserves and they're giving up a Saturday or a weekend a month. Now, if
Yeah,
I would love to do my civic duty in that way and just like, all right, well, I have Saturdays that it would still be an inconvenience for sure because now I'm giving up a Saturday to do this, but it's to help out my country and my community. I would absolutely do that. But the way that it's set up now, especially that 2 month thing, that's
absolutely.
prohibitive for a lot of people in this country.
Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, most of them go pretty quickly. Like this was like a unique
Hmm.
case, but I anything over a couple weeks, honestly, becomes really hard on
Yeah.
people.
Well, my
Because and also too the remote thing. I want to point something out real quick. There was a piece of paper that was sitting there saying that in certain cases, individuals are allowed to connect
mhm.
remotely, right? And I thought about that and I thought, wow, how amazing would that be? If they're like, oh, you're going to be on this trial for a week, here's the time when you need to log into your call. And you simply sit in your office or you sit at a coffee shop or whatever it is, and you sit there and you listen and you observe and you write notes and you do your thing from the comfort of your own home. How does it change anything that I have to actually sit in the courtroom next to a bunch of people I don't know wearing a mask and writing notes on a piece of paper versus sitting with a cup of coffee and enjoying the process of absorbing that information from the comfort of my own home, right? I think the majority of them should be done remotely, and I think you can make it so much faster
Well,
if
I
they
think
did.
that the what they're worried about then is that they just won't pay attention. That they'll have it on while they
Yeah,
have Law and Order on TV, and they won't pay attention to it. So, I
yeah.
mean, and to be fair, there's you can't really guarantee that if they're sitting in a jury box that they're going to be paying attention and not daydreaming or trying to get on their phone.
Let me be clear about something, D. There are plenty of times when I've been sitting in a classroom or something like that, and have completely zoned out. Okay. I think we all have. I have gone to some beautiful, magical place and then like, whoop, oh my gosh, 5 minutes have passed. Like we've all done it. We all have been in school. We've all had
Sure.
those days. It can happen
This is
anywhere, you
why
know?
the condensed form, right? If even if you're doing having them come in and do it, you're going to keep their attention a lot better because you're not going to have it interrupted by, all right, well now, there needs to be some sidebar that's going to take, 5, 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes in the middle of everything where or maybe they go back to the judge's quarters and have a conversation. Last time I got called in for jury duty, the second day I showed up, because remember the first day they stopped right before they could ask me whether or not I had any kind of biases in the situation. We came back, waited around for 3 hours while they
Oh,
deliberated in private, and then came out and said, "Okay, they settled the case." And it was just like, well, why am I waiting around for 3 hours for you guys to talk? Like, what is this? This is ridiculous. And all of that needs to be worked out so that you don't have all of these people. If you have to pay them, here's if you really want to fix this process, if you really wanted to motivate the criminal justice system in order to kind of get their stuff together and kind of get modernized and get more efficient, make them pay what that person would be paid if they were at work. Whatever their salary is, you have to pay
yeah.
them fully. Like I mean, if you're paying somebody alimony, you have to pay them enough in order for them to have the lifestyle that they're accustomed to, not like whatever is convenient for the PAE, right? Pay them like let's do a ballot initiative. That person has to be paid whatever their normal salary is or wage is, so they're not taking any kind of financial hit. And then I bet you're going to find a way to not use up all that person's time.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. And actually, all the things that we've discussed today are all things that they should test.
Mhm.
Like, they should run studies and try these things out. And if they can become more efficient, become more effective, and kind of enhance the whole process, then they should do it. And, I don't know. It was very insightful for me to do it. I'm glad I had the opportunity to go in and go through all this because it really kind of made me think about processes and how quickly we move things in the valley, when it comes to technology. But like outside of technology, some things have just been the same
Mhm.
forever. And part of it is they do want to keep it the same, right? They want to say like, hey, the way that we did jury selection in 1923 is the same way we do it right now, and we keep things consistent. But that doesn't mean you can't enhance the process using modern technology,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of, I think, the point that we're trying to get at. But any last points before we wrap up, D? Because I think this was a fun and kind of out of the blue and interesting topic
Well,
to go
I
down.
mean, I actually get frustrated when I see kind of like these bad experiences, and I kind of take it personally. But I do think that
Oh, I
I think
know.
this is better for everyone, and I know that the criminal justice system or the court system in general, they're very overloaded and they have a lot of things going on. So they're kind of getting these short term. They're focused on the short term, and you always have to have somebody involved in any kind of process that has an eye on the long term and can look at advancing everything. And that's kind of what's been missing. And the other is they don't necessarily have the biggest motivation in order to improve these processes because I mean, their work is not really going to change one way or the other, or at least they feel that way.
That's
But
true.
if the reality is, if
Yeah.
they can figure this out, imagine just, the pitch. I think the pitch in the room is just like imagine that instead of spending all this time working on who can get recused and trying to get people to actually serve on a jury and all this jury selection stuff. Imagine if just all of the stuff happens in the background and you get 80% or 90% to your final jury, and then it's just disqualifying people who have biases in the room and not just like working through all trying to scrape together a jury of people who are willing to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you, D. Well, I think this is a wrap for today. Thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. If you have comments, ideas, or anything related to this topic, feel free to hit us up on our YouTube page at the X Podcast. That's at the X Podcast. Please subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. We're trying to get it kind of built up since we switched over from Twitter to YouTube. Also, if you like this podcast and found it interesting and informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you like to use. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see you all next week.